we're creating classrooms that are inviting, creating schools that are inviting, making sure that our students have feel valued and respected in their school space. And so again, it really talks about a lot of different things about redlining and where, when you move to a new area, one of the first questions that a realtor is asked is, what are some of the better schools? And then when that's said and done, then I said, okay, within my house range of a budget, what house can I afford in that area? And so those are things that are even contribute to redlining. Understanding that, students will have difficulty just by the way their name is pronounced and getting a job and different things like that. So I just wanted to open up, and we can do popcorn style, Matt, and just get some reflections and kind of unpack the video. But I just wanted to frame that conversation and understanding that this is, again, a broken system that it's our job as educators to rebuild.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to Craig and Dennis about it, but I want to ask you, as somebody who's my friend, who's successful, who's in a doctoral program, did you see this as a student yourself? You're an intellectual educator, going to be Dr. Marin soon. Did you see this, or is it sometimes talking about implicit bias, think that the kids in like New York City or something like that? But you're accomplished. Did you see this?
Absolutely. So I would say there are overt, implicit or explicit bias, and then there's subtle. And the subtle ones are the ones that hurt the most, because you know what's happening, but when you speak up about it, if you have the courage to do that, people make you feel like you're crazy. No, Basil, that's not what happened. That's not how I meant it. And it was how I meant it. That was the tone, and that's how I was come across. To give you a better example, I had a mentor in my junior year that was helping me really to get ready for college. And once I had got it together and figured out that I wanted to, be a better person, she had told me about a waiver for SATs and told me the specific form. I grew up in a family, we didn't have much money. And so she said, go to your guidance counselor and ask for this form so your SAT will be paid for. So I went in the next day. I asked the secretary, can I please see my guidance counselor to get this form that I need? I walked into my guidance counselor's office and knew the form that I needed. I told her specifically what I needed, and her response to me was, well, Basil, kids not going to college, they don't need this form.
Gee.
That's explicit.
Wow.
I asked you for the form. I'm specifically getting the SAT waiver to take the test to try to apply for college, and you are a gatekeeper and discouraging me from doing that. How many of our students don't even know to ask the right questions, or don't have the advocates themselves, or as a parent, they don't have a parent that will advocate for them to say, hey, this is what I want for my child. I'm trying to create a better way and a better life. And so needless to say, that was her last day at work. Because my mentor, Dr. Talley, came in the next day and had the superintendent there, and she no longer had a job. But how much time does that happen to students who are trying to do better?
Awesome. And Craig and Dennis, jump in here, either off of the video or some of these that we see in education today, some of the conversations that are happening that shouldn't be happening.
Craig, you want to go for it first? Okay, I'll go for it then. A lot of times when I have these type of conversations, and I have these conversations with members of our staff all the time at the school that I'm a principal of, when you think about the world today, we have more access to technology than ever before. Financially, we have more money now than we ever really had in education, going back to when school buildings were first put together. We have more research in regards to our pedagogy and everything else. But why is it that our achievement gaps, our income gaps are still growing at an astronomical rate when you're looking at African Americans and you're looking at whites? And one of the things that really it boils down to me is I don't debate ethics and morality with anyone anymore. I stopped because I really feel it really boils down to people's values. Because if you tell me something is wrong, which we do with our kids all the time in school, we say, this is wrong, you shouldn't do that. But then when it's upon us to try to change something, we don't. And Adam Grant, in his book Originals, he talks about system justification. And it's the idea, and I'll just read part of it, its core idea is that people are motivated to rationalize the status quo as legitimate, even if it goes directly against their interest. If we have kids that cannot acquire the skills they need to become productive citizens in our society, that goes against everybody's best interests. But why do we allow it to persist? The reason we allow it to persist primarily goes around this ideology of we all want to acquire all the resources we can for ourselves and for future generations. Nobody wants to experience a certain level of loss. And when you're experiencing loss, who's going to mitigate that loss for you? And Balkan, in my doctoral studies, because I got to keep up with these three here, one of the things that he talked about was the progressive narrative that we have in American culture. We all know that slavery was wrong. We all know that women and men getting paid different wages is wrong, but we allow it to persist. And then all of a sudden, a law is passed or something happens that turns the tide. And then we celebrate this newfound like freedom that people have. But guess what? What are we really celebrating? It was always wrong to begin with. So we have to remove ourselves from these moments of celebration that embraces, oh, we overcame something. Is it really okay to overcome something that has marginalized and set people back? And not just them, but future generations of kids, and the cycle continues? Basil, Matt, you asked, do we have high school stories? Absolutely. Not only do we have high school stories, I can tell you I have adult stories where people will doubt the legitimacy of me being a principal, especially when I'm the principal in many suburban areas and I'm told I should, well, you're a token, or maybe you should be in the inner city because more and more kids will benefit if you were there. All kids need you, each and every single one. And at one of the schools I was the principal of, and I'm so glad I was the principal there at this time because it was a predominantly white school. And because of behaviors that typically go on in schools, we know that there's a huge discrepancy between African-American student referrals and suspensions than other minorities or other races within our school. The same thing was present at the current school I'm at now, but we made some value checks and searches and we reduced it to 42 last year, when the previous year they had over 200. But that was a lot of soul searching. But there was this one young man, his mother called me one day and said, I think my son is going to be racist. And answering the phone, I was like a little shocked, so tell me more. And she said, my son came home one day and said, all of the Black students in my class get in trouble. So I think all Black people are bad. And she's like, well, tell me more. Do you know anyone that's not bad? And she said, well, Mr. Griffin is Black. He treats me really nice. He's not bad. So therefore, I don't believe all Black people are bad. But what if I wasn't his principal at that time? As a 5th grade student, he would have had the notion in his head, based on us not systematically meeting the needs of different cultures in our school, that all Black people were bad. Do you know how hard that would have been to break if he went from 5th grade all the way through high school and then into college with that mentality?
Yeah, and you can see it in what seems like what Basil said, and we're going to kick it over to Craig next. It seems like a one-time thing, but when you add up those one-time things, like you said, Dennis, over time, and they keep happening, and you just said from 2nd grade or elementary school to high school, 5, 6, 8 years of one-time things, it then becomes a belief system. Craig, welcome back.
Hey.
So
it's interesting to follow up behind both Dennis and Basil. I think one of the things I would like to do for your community is just kind of share a little bit more about myself. I do realize that it's hard to have a conversation around equity if you don't feel that you have a touch point with the people who you're actually engaging in a conversation, a dialogue with. So I just wanted to share with you all, first and foremost, just again, thankful that Matthew just reached out and asked me to join you all in your communities, who I know are really committed to some really great work to make sure your communities are culturally responsive and equitable. And I know that in 160 some people joining for this conversation, that you really are looking within yourselves to figure out how can you do this work even more broadly. But it's work that is tenuous. It is work that turns you inside out. It is work that really challenges the core of who you are. And the only way that people really feel led and motivated to actually, change and adjust is because there's a relationship that actually takes place, and people feel more apt to actually, look at things differently, shift a little bit, and make different kinds of decisions. So I just want to share. I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, to a Vietnam veteran turned truck driver. My dad is, been truck driving for over 50 years. My mom was an adult educator. She is also a parent educator. She was a substitute teacher. Both of them promoted hard work, education, and a passion for taking care of the community. I happen to attend a historically Black university in New Orleans, Louisiana, Dillard University, where I earned my bachelor's degree in elementary ed. And then over the course of my time there, for those who know New Orleans, knows really great food, really great music. And some of you all probably have those Vegas stories, those New Orleans stories where, what happened in New Orleans stayed there. But, one of the things I think about is—
I don't think we're sharing those stories right now, Craig, but keep going.
Oh, I don't know. All I'm going to say is a hurricane is a hurricane is a hurricane. But, in my experience growing up in New Orleans, I grew up Catholic, so that's something interesting. But also growing up in New Orleans, where I consistently found myself inspired by music, by art. I was one of the top students in my classes until I got to 9th grade. But in 9th grade, I encountered some educators who didn't share my melanin, and found that they kind of boxed me in and said I was problematic. And I'll share a little bit more in a second. I had learned through my educational experiences, just my cultural upbringing, and my parents, who every Saturday was a time to clean your room, you clean the house, you turned on music, and in the evening hour, friends and family came over just to kind of hang out. And so through those experiences, I learned about the magical moments of infusing expressive arts, restorative and social justice approaches. And I even decided to come here to Cambridge. I live in Boston, but I said I want to go to Lesley University, and I got my master's degree there. If there's anything you'll learn about, me, you'll learn that I have actually championed the underdog. I have consistently, because I've been the one who's been discounted. Look at all this wonderful chocolatey decadence that you got right here. You know what I'm saying? And so what I realized is that regardless of the smile on my face, regardless of the fact that I have multiple degrees, regardless of the fact that I have a strong, noted experience and legacy of working in the communities with young people who also are marginalized by language, by ability, by economic status, by citizenship. Many of the things that really challenge their ability to be right there with everyone at the front lines, charging forward and doing really great work. Many of us growing up have had to face obstacles. Some of us have been grown up in single parent homes. Some of us are born of immigrant families. Some of us have, grew up in some of the most challenging economic environments ever. Some of us were born to families, or born within families that were impacted by domestic abuse, substance abuse, and more. And so when you bring all of that to the table, then you say, okay, we're going to now try to educate you. So if you came up in an experience where you and 12 other people, and then this was in my college experience, were laying on a floor. So you literally pulled your clothes up, you got whatever bite you could, you fought off all of the things that you could in your head to come to school and try to attend to things. And so whether or not it was hunger, whether or not it was that you didn't have enough money to get on the bus or what have you, you got into a classroom. And in my 5th grade experience, I was top of my class. I was super smart. I was very inquisitive. I loved making friends. I loved being athletic. I actually loved going to church, and I didn't want to be an altar boy though. Didn't want to do that, but that's a whole nother talk. And what I found was I encountered a teacher who did not see the greatness in me. She didn't see it. She didn't care about it. She wanted me out of her way because she didn't know what to do with me. And so sometimes I asked myself, well, was it because I was a male? Because there were other males in the room. Was it because I happened to be dark chocolatey and male in this classroom? And I had to start asking myself questions, because this same woman, for 6 months out of my 9-month educational career, put me outside. Yes, like literally outside, put my desk and said, you are going to learn outside every day. I was one that did everything I was supposed to do. I was one who was a friend and help, but there was something inside of her that made her decide that she didn't like who I was. And so that work just challenged me to say, I never want that experience for someone else who looks like me, especially, in these conditions. And so when I think about the equity conversations you're having, I really want you to think about, maybe it's the little boy and little girl in you who didn't always show up as equal to those who were in your communities. And what were the experiences? Who were the teachers? What were the practices and policies that were put in place so that you could actually ascend and be magical and awesome? And how are you now going to do that for other young people, regardless of all of the identities they carry? How are you going to create the best opportunities for them to thrive? And so this is about disrupting something that's DNA deep inside of you. And so I'm gonna pause here because I get excited about this, as you can.
You do? I didn't get that from you, Craig. I thought you were just kind of laying low for now. But I'm gonna jump off one of the things that you said, because there's a line that Basil says often, and actually I heard it about a year and a half ago when we were in DC, when he says your silence speaks volumes, and you were describing this this scene, which was sad, where this student, young Craig Martin, was out doing something that other students were. Basil and Dennis, and like, what can our educators do? How can we feel empowered to say something or to change something that we might see right now? That, not to say anything's done deliberately or we have policies or curriculum, but what can we do to start taking a look and say something, as you say a lot, Basil, or Dennis, you're saying, be that person to make a change. What if you were to give us some action steps? Because I know we're going to be talking about this later. Where would you start as building leaders? I know, Basil, you're in the high school, and Dennis, you're at the elementary, so we have a good mix here of having a district lens.
On many occasions, what we tend to do is we tend to isolate it as this is just elementary, or this is just school, or this is like a kid's home. And when we talk about systems, they're all connected, and there's a ripple effect that can happen over a duration of time. And Craig, like what you were saying, like, I'm quite sure Basil has very similar experiences. I have some very similar experiences. My daughters now have some very similar experiences, but it's different when I go to their schools and I'm saying, oh, I'm a principal, then the conversation changes, unfortunately. But last night, I always wanted to be able to say that my legacy for students would always be that someone believed in them to prepare them for this world, because there are so many obstacles against them. And when I say that, I really mean all students, but I do focus in on my Black students, Hispanic students, because I know they have a little bit more challenges, but I try to do it for everyone. And last night, a mom reached out to me on Facebook, and she said to me that she just wanted to reach out and just thank me for being a positive role model in her kids' lives. I'm like, oh, like, it made me feel good. And she said her son's name, like, oh, like, I think about them all the time. Like, what happened to them? And one of the most heartbreaking things happened. She told me that one was killed 2 years ago at the age of 15. And then she told me the other one is in jail. And I couldn't say anything else. See, when I think about being an educator, the content is very important to me, because if you don't have the content, if you don't have the skills, you can't acquire your aspirations in life. And we've glorified this whole like get quick scheme of money, especially in the Black community, because when people don't have for so long, they want to have, they want to feel good. You'll even hear like conversations, well, you bought an iPhone. Well, I'm sorry if I bought an iPhone because at that moment, it made me feel like I was a part of something. And if you really want to know where to start, what do you want the outcomes of your students to be in the world that you know is against them? And that goes for women, that goes for religious reasons, whatever you can come up with. Because in our society, we are so divisive and we try to say like we value diversity and we value being a part of the group. A lot of times we don't. Look at our circles. Look how we judge people right away versus trying to get to know someone. Because we all have that bias that Basil was talking about. But the one solace that I did take from her conversation with me, at least that at this age, I know I made a difference, even though I don't like the outcomes. For a child to go through, I don't know, 12 years of school, be the age of 18, and to say that his dad wasn't there, he didn't have family in his corner, and the only positive male role model that he could reference was me, what were his possible outcomes to begin with then? See, I don't look at that as a failure on him. I look at that as a failure on our society. We allowed that to happen because we didn't say anything, because we didn't lift a finger, because when Craig was sitting in the hallway, I didn't go and say, you know what, I'm gonna go talk to that teacher after school and say, why is Craig always in the hallway? Because the thing that people fail to realize about equity is this, and we often put up like the fences and the boxes and all those other great analogies with it. But here's the part that we don't talk about. How in the world do we compensate for the amount of loss that people have to go through? If you want equity, there will be a sacrifice. You might have to sacrifice resources. You might have to sacrifice friends. You might have to sacrifice unlearning what you currently have thoughts about. But you can't have equity without that sacrifice. And all I can do is say to you, I promise you that sacrifice will be worth it later on. It's just we might not see it.
No, that's awesome. And Basil, I want to have you jump in here because I referenced one of your go-to lines that I reference all the time because it really hit home for me.
Absolutely. And so I know that a lot of times I will reference my good friend Krista Lay, where she says you have to call people in when your colleague across the hallway does something that was racist or does something that demeans a student. You got to call them in. I know we're used to the word calling them out, but calling them in and says, hey, and maybe you're doing this after school. You like the way you treated that student today wasn't okay. Kind of walk me through what happened and what was your reasoning behind it. So calling people in, I kind of want to go over the ABCs for me about equity and how we're helping students to be successful. And so A will stand for access. How are we giving students access to a better education? And that can look different for a lot of different reasons. If you're at the district level, that can relate to funding. Right? How are we funding different schools? Are we giving the most high poverty schools the funding that they need to be successful? The second is I'm at the high school level, so we're looking at honors and AP classes. When I speak across the nation or I go visit schools across the nation, I can always tell you when I'm walking into an honors AP class because there's no diversity. And so what do we do for those classes? And what I will tell you are you as teachers, counselors, you're gatekeepers. Because what happens is a lot of times to be in those high level classes, you need a recommendation from a teacher, you need a recommendation from a counselor. And so what teachers will typically do, you'll look at previous years of academics. And if I had a C, you want to be in an honors level English 11 class, but your English 10 was a C, teachers will say, oh, you're not high enough to be in this class, so you can't be here. Right? And those are the literature speaks to kids that are taking honors and AP classes are the kids who are going to be most successful in college, because they're getting the skill sets to be able to continue at that higher level. So how are we giving kids access to the education that they need? And then last thing I want to speak about is I was a special ed teacher for the access part. And so a lot of times at the elementary level, we tell kids or tell families, oh my goodness, we're going to do a child study, your student's struggling. Let's go ahead and give them an IEP so they have extra supports. and it sounds really good, but there's an over-identification of minority males in special education backed up by literature. And what happens is a lot of times it's very highly unlikely those same kids will ever be tested for gifted. So then they're tracked. Our students are tracked. When we talk about elementary kids and moving into middle school or to high school, you are tracked based on your skill level, based on what you're, the special ed, gifted, honors, you're tracked. And so that is important to understand. That are we being advocates for our kids? Are we seeing a kid who wasn't special ed, but now, okay, we could take him off the IEP, or a student that with a little extra push, I can maybe put you in an honors level class. I've seen kids struggle in a general ed class, and then you put them in an honors level class and they excel. So one of my favorite movies is Stand and Deliver. And you all, if you've seen that movie, you know that class was the worst class, perceived class in the building. That teacher had his work cut out for him. And by the end of the movie, they had the highest scores in the building. The state came in and made them retake the test because they believed they had cheated based on their previous years of assessment. So students are sponges. They will rise to the level that you set for them, but you have to set a high bar. Don't allow them just to reach for low-hanging fruit. B, I'll say, stands for belief. You have to believe in your students. For me, again, I spoke about earlier, I was an alternative student myself. I would not be here where I'm at talking in front of you or speaking to you if I didn't have teachers that believed in me and said that I could do better. One of the things is, do you know your students? Do you know your students in terms of, I would say being an educator today, you're 70% teacher, 30% you got to be a social worker. You got to know what's going on in the community. You have to know what's going on internally with kids, and you have to know what's going on at the house. And those different areas of environments impact those students. You might be the person that's speaking positivity to them, and then they go home and they hear mom or grandma or dad, if it's there, they're saying you won't ever be anything. You're going to be just like your dad. You're going to, nobody in this family has ever finished high school. So why do you think you're going to be the kid to finish high school? Nobody's went to college. Or they might be the first person in their family, like my family, to go to college. So they don't have a template. So who do they ask questions to? So those are some things that really help students when you talk about belief. One of the graphs that I use when I speak is that, there's a cat looking in a puddle of water. A lot of our students feel like they're a stray cat, but you see the line and the reflection of the water. And so you have to be able to see that line and push that kid, because they're going to have to believe in the belief of you before they believe it in themselves. And that's what happened to me. Is that my teacher, Miss Sankson, who was not my favorite teacher in 9th grade, but later on became my favorite teacher, she saw that line and said, Basil, you use your leadership ability in a different way. You're from a different cloth, and you don't have to do what everyone else is doing. And I would say give compassion over compliance. Right now we are in a virtual space, and so a lot of times as educators, as teachers, we have compliance, and so we can be very punitive. If a student is not in my live session, I'm counting them absent. If a student doesn't turn in an assignment right away, I'm not giving them full credit. We don't know what kids are going through right now because of COVID, because of what their home situations are looking like. You have to have compassion right now over compliance during this time, because those kids need us to be compassionate. And lastly, I'll speak about culturally responsive teaching, which is C. We have to go back to relationships, you all. That is the foundation of everything. One of my favorite people I love to watch is Dr. Rita Pearson, which says every child deserves a champion. You have to be a champion for students. And that starts with relationship. It starts with knowing who your students are. Do you know your student's name? Can you pronounce it correctly? Do you know what their home situation is like? Do you know that I'm living in a hotel room? Do you know these things about kids that's impacting their educational experience? And then I would say, if you're not already, and I'm sure Matt is, but tie in those SEL, social emotional learning competencies right now, because those kids need to know their self-awareness. They have to regulate their own emotions. They need to understand that they can be a leader and try to figure out some of their goal setting for them to be successful. And the last thing I would say is that the students have to see themselves in your school. And I know that's hard right now in the virtual space, but I will tell you, whenever I consult around schools around the nation, I can feel in the first 30 seconds when I step into a school, is there love in the school, just by being in the lobby? Do kids see themselves on the posters on the wall, right? If you only have posters on the wall of Olympians who are white, then these kids are walking through your hallway every day saying, though, that will never be me, because I don't see me. I don't see me in the books. I don't see me in the literature. I don't see me in the library. The kids have to see themselves to be able to be a part of your school community, and that will affect your school culture, your climate, and that will affect kids being able to be successful in your school. But as educators, you have the awesome opportunity to create that. You have the awesome opportunity to be able to say, you know what, I believe in you, and I want you to be successful because I know you can do it. And all these different competencies we've talked about today. Again, I will say it's a lot we've given you all today, guys. So please understand this, some time with it, and figure out where you want to jump in. But it's important work, as Craig said. But you have to start it. And if you're looking for the 5-step easy plan, you're in the wrong seminar. But it's great work. It's awesome work, and you can find if you've never listened to the starfish poem, you can save a starfish. Start with one and change the life of one student, and after that, multiply it and let it kind of ripple through your school.
No, that is awesome, and that is, taking all of it in, and I know we'll have time to process it later. And Craig, I want to talk with you for a second. I'm going to try to lump a few of the questions together because you, as the local educator of the three, you kind of have an understanding of Massachusetts, and we're not racist here, and we treat everybody the same, and however, we're 70% white educators and even higher in white leaders. And we talked a lot about the Black Lives Matter. And we even have people in our own community saying we shouldn't say that. We should say all lives matter. And how can we, as a primarily white staff, not totally, but primarily, how can we take this on in our current culture and our current surroundings in the state to be the champions, to differentiate between why are you saying Black Lives Matter? Does that mean the other lives don't matter either? And talking about the second piece I want to jump on, Basil was saying something, and I want to do the reverse of it. You were saying where you want to believe in the child because maybe at home somebody doesn't believe. But if a child comes here and we are having this diversity conversation and we're having this really deep look, and then they go home and it's actually different at home, and they say, yeah, don't worry about that. So it's almost the reverse of that could happen. So that's a lot to throw at you, Craig, but just some of those just nuggets to talk about us, because we are going to start action planning as well.
Oh my. So I don't know about y'all. Don't feel it feels like we had Six Flags. Like it was just like whoo, it was just a lot happening. And Basil just pulled us all together. So I'm gonna start with one of my favorite people. Now, if you know anything about me, I was on the Twitter chat last night. And I am she is like my godmother, great sister, Dr. Brene Brown. I don't, how many of y'all know about Dr. Brene Brown? Oh, okay, okay, cool.
I know about it because of you.
This is the right crew here. This is the right crew. So Dr. Brene Brown does a lot of work around daring greatly, daring to lead, vulnerability, braving. There's just a host of resources you can actually explore around her. She's just had this really, phenomenal conversation. So you got to check out the podcast, Unlocking Us with Dr. Ibram Kendi. And it's on Spotify, Apple. Like, it is worth your 45 minutes to an hour. So listen to the two of them have a really interesting conversation around race, equity in America. I'm going to answer your question, Matthew, which is very tough, but it's even tougher for when they feel like, what if we don't have but one or two, chocolate chips, wonderful brown, young people or students of color in our community? How do we do this in a way that is equitable and fair and also supports them, but also grows us? Because the community will say, well, I don't understand why we need to do this because it's just 2 of them. It's just 5 students in a school of 500. Why do we have to do this? And so it has a deeper, it asks you about how do you create the kind of community that you believe will be a space of inclusion and belonging. So when the kids do come, when the families do come, they feel a sense of connection to you because you've already made the space ready for them. But Dr. Brene Brown says, you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you cannot choose both. And so in this work, you have to make a decision here about whether or not you are going to be courageous and you are going to do some things differently from the way that other people may be doing it. And it means that you may, in the all white context that Matthew has painted as a backdrop, there's white solidarity. If you've you've never really had to think about your privilege. And when we talk about privilege, it's about class. If you've never had to think about whether or not you can go to a medical facility and get immediate health care, that's something to think about. If you're thinking about ethnicity and culture and race, citizenship. I just, I did like a series with some educators in New Hampshire, and they talked about how many new Americans are joining, their communities, and whether or not they were Somali, Thai, Burmese, they're joining their communities and they're asking different questions about, well, how do we create an inclusive culture, an inclusive community for these members who are joining us? And so citizenship is something to think about. Some of you are actually navigating gender, cisgender versus those who are non-binary. All things to be thinking about. Sexuality, masculine and male privilege. I mean, I know Matthew, myself, Dennis, and Basil could go on and on about how privilege is sometimes tied to your culture. And so how does that afford you certain privileges and spaces in ways that you may or may not have thought about? Ability and linguistic privileges. And so if you're saying, well, we're in this mostly white community, the real question here is, how do you ensure that it's equitable regardless of who joins your community at any point in time? And so here's some things to think about in result to Matthew's question. Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. And I'll tie this back to what Basil said and also the connection of Dennis's story. Basil talked about, he shared, that this started back in February. And this, when we look at racial difference, if you read Dr. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti, it actually starts way before then. A lot of this was about profiteering, and people then making a decision that your melanin was currency or currency. And so when we talk about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, in theory, yes, all lives should matter. And so you could get into arguments across the board, but every immigrant, every person who has citizenship status or not actually matters too, right? But here's the difference between All Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter. Today, I could be
All right, not a good place to cut out. I didn't know if are you back? All right, Basil or Dennis, you want to jump in?
Basil, you want to take it, or?
That's a deep part to jump in on.
How about it? That's how we just roll.
But I'll try my best. Again, just the notion that Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter it is true, because again, we've been marginalized for so long. And I think for me, I saw a graphic where there was fist, and they had Black Lives Matter kind of above all of the fist, but really it's just trying to get equality, right? And trying to have what everyone else has. And I think that's what the most important part is that we just want an equal, fair shake at economy, at education. It's understanding that we also have a place here in the world as well, and understanding that we've been marginalized for so long, as you said. And so I think for me, I was talking to Dennis about this, and I feel like, I said, why was the death of George Floyd so impactful? I mean, you go all the way back to essentially all the deaths that have happened over the last 3 decades. And for me, I think because it was during COVID and the world stopped, the eyes and ears of the world were open at a different place, right? And everyone had to watch it, no matter whether you are making $8 an hour or whether you are a multimillionaire. Everyone had to watch it and experience that. And so I think that has been, change is coming. Change is coming, and understanding that there are a lot of policies and procedures that are in place as well that have to be changed. I would say at the Department of Education federal level, at the at the United States, at the toppest levels, those policies all trickle down and affect us all in our individual ways. And so I see Craig here is back, so I want him to finish up what he was saying.
Now he's going outside. I like it.
What you said before Craig goes, though. Like, I want to follow, because I don't want to follow what Craig was saying. It was too strong.
Go ahead, Craig.
One of the things that Basil talked about that was really like insightful is like there's a difference, and I put it in the chat, like between an affinity group and a group that is exclusionary. But in addition to that, what happens when you like have a level of empathy and place yourself in somebody else's shoes. I can remember that when Mike Vick, famous quarterback, was involved with dogfighting, he went to jail for 2 years. Like there's this moral outrage for it. But yet I have Breonna Taylor, who died, who went into the wrong house. They passed a law to say, like, you can no longer do this, but the people that killed her are still walking the street. With George Floyd, like, we're told that killing is wrong. But yet, time and time again, the data is showing that when people died and you happen to be a black male, what happens? But our society tells us that killing is wrong. So is killing really wrong then? And the message that I really try to tell everyone is Fullen talked about the way that people change. And this is why Bloody Sunday was so important back during the civil rights movement. And it's just a parallel. People, very small percentage of our population changes because they think about something, analyze it, and then change. For the majority of our population, what needs to happen is they have to see it, they have to feel it, and then they'll change. When you think about what happened with George Floyd, people saw it. When you think about what happened with George Floyd, it had to sit with you, you had to feel it because you couldn't believe that happened. And now there's this outcry for change, but this has been happening for an extensively long period of time and people are outraged by it. Like, how do we not make this a moment, but you continue to make this a movement? Because just because you have a policy change, you implement a policy change, somebody will try to find a loophole through a policy. And that's why you have to go back to having a really strong share of value on this journey of equity. Go ahead, Craig.
All right, so I will close out with this. Thank you all, because I do realize some of you all will be transitioning out. So yes, I really appreciate Basil and Dennis coming, adding to this. I just want to say that right now I'm sitting outside, and I've been living here for 15 years. And so when I go out into the community, I have to bring all of myself in, no matter how many no matter how many awards I have, my education, my criteria, none of that matters when the police stop me. And so when they stop me, I may not come home. I might not come back home. And so just because of the hue of my skin, not because of my smile, not because I have given and done things, I could just be killed because of my skin. And that's something that we have to recognize in this America. So what are some things that people can do moving forward? One, regardless of the multiple identities and richness that people bring, one, see each individual you serve and encounter them as human. Just do it. Two, curate, carry, and converse affirming identity narratives beyond your own and the ones you're comfortable with. Share those stories. So I shared a bunch of resources so that they can be part of your conversation, part of your canon of materials you're using, part of the experiences that you're having with your friends to talk about different kinds of people who show up in your conversation and experiences. Three, promote policies and practices that protect, affirm, and elevate equity, inclusion, and belonging of all human beings. If you want to do something right now, I know most of you know a family, someone who is probably making cupcakes, or they have a really great architecture firm, or they have a great landscaping business, or they really do well with numbers, but they're not sitting at the decision-making tables. So they're not brought into the conversation so that they can actually be a resource. Bringing people to the table who also can share power and be at the table is part of the experience. And you need different people who are at the table to do so. And if you're not willing to do that because you feel uncomfortable that your friends, your community is going to look at you differently and treat you differently, then it means that you still have a lot more deeper work that you have to do. And it goes back to the Dr. Brene Brown quote that I started with is, you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you cannot have both. And this equity work means that we will have to consistently be uncomfortable so that there are many more lives that will be comfortable with being included and feel a sense of belonging and connectedness to the communities you build and serve.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to give Basil and Dennis one more minute too, but I also want to be respectful of your time because you are leaders. The three of you are leading schools. The three of you are pushing education. Three of you are pushing me every day. And besides being amazing educators, to be able to call you my friends is something that I cherish. It's awesome, and calling me out when I need to be called out, which is what we need to have, and having that comfort level to become better, take that next step. And as you said, comes with sacrifices, or comes with real hard discussions. So Basil and Dennis, I'd love to give you one last minute because I want to respect your time as leaders as well.
I'm going first because I don't want to follow Basil. So I'm already pushing my luck following Craig right now. Once again, like I'm very glad that I've had the opportunity to connect with Basil, Craig, and with Matt. And the irony is, as much as we talk and as much as we collaborate, you would think we were all in the same space. I met all three of them through Twitter. And we happened to be at a conference a couple of years ago, and that's when we met in person, and it was as if we've known each other and been friends for the longest. My daughters laugh at me because I always tell them don't talk to strangers, but then they say so be careful when you have that conversation with your kids. I spend a lot of time talking about leadership in my journey, and the one thing that I will always say to people is this: without conflict, there can be no leadership. And when you're talking about creating levels of change, you're essentially putting yourself in the leadership position to say, what can I do to alter this reality? And even if you alter the reality for just one person, there's a domino effect. Like I shared, and I have multiple stories where I have students that felt like they were counted out that to this day still connect with me through Facebook or show up at my house because we were family. We were more than just teacher, student, we were family. The piece that I tell everyone in regards to that is when you are on this leadership journey, please know that there's duality to it. You're never going to make anyone happy, everyone happy. There will be some complaints, but you have to rest assured that you are using your influence to make the world better. And if you see a situation and you feel that your vision of the future is not greater than the conflict that you're going to endure, I would tell anyone at that time, do not engage. Here's why. If you engage and your vision wasn't greater to deal with the storm that's going to come your way, that means the status quo, that means that system is going to become even stronger. So if you feel you can't do it by yourself, and the reality is that you cannot do it by yourself, as you see, it's we're all here together right now. Go align with yourself with someone that can be strong in areas where you're not strong at. Everybody doesn't have to be the voice. Sometimes we need people to support the voice. All of our support is what's going to allow us to continue to enact change in our world. And we have the power to do that each and every day with kids, because it's hard to change adults. But we have so much hope with kids, but what the message that we give them, we better make sure that we're living that message. Stop telling kids to do what's right like it's easy. Because we're faced with that same decision every single day. And you know what? On many occasions, myself included, we turn a blind eye. But at some point in time, we have to stop, because that decision to turn a blind eye creates a ripple effect. And we don't know the generations that will be impacted by that decision to turn that blind eye.
Powerful. Thank you so much. Basil, bring us home.
Wow, Dennis, you lead me to follow that. Okay. So again, thank you all for your time. Thank you all. I hope that as something that Dennis kind of said earlier, that you don't allow this to be a moment, but you allow this to be a movement for you all in your schools, in your division, in your classes, and understand that some of this work you all will have to do on your own after you've left. I've posted the video in the chat. Craig is giving you a lot of different, tools and resources. And so add some of those things to your toolbox and do some of that research on your own, because it will only help you to be better. But understanding that when we are in this work of rebuilding, it takes some work. It takes some work, and you're trying to rebuild years of oppression, years of a system that, again, that's not built for students of color. But I'm sure all of you all have success stories of students who've come back to you later, or families that have come back to you and said, thank you for not giving up on my child, because if it wasn't for you, my child wouldn't have graduated college, wouldn't have graduated high school, wouldn't have been promoted from elementary school to middle school. And so you all matter. You all are able to make a tremendous change. So understanding, again, that during this time, I said it earlier, but having compassion for yourself, for your colleagues, and specifically for your administrators and for your division level leaders. They're having to make some incredible decisions. I told someone it's like trying to hit a target that's moving. I mean, you get one thing on Wednesday, and by Friday it's changed 2 or 3 times. And I know you all have experienced that. Really practice self-care for yourself, and practice turning off at some point if you can, and being there for your families, and take a time for you, because you're going to need that momentum to carry you through. The last thing I would say is, do not despise or disregard small beginnings. A mighty oak tree comes from an acorn, which is the size of a nickel. And so you're able to be the oak tree in the desert. You're able to be the oasis that your school needs, that your families need. But again, don't despise the small beginnings or the impact you made an elementary school student or a middle school student, or you said something in 9th grade and now that kid's 25 and they say, man, thank you for that conversation, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have had it. So again, all our students need a champion. Save that starfish that's in your classroom. Might be a little pricklier than other starfish, but they're still worth it. And they still need an opportunity, need a chance. So thank you all for the work that you're doing, and continue to be tremendous leaders.
Awesome. And thank you all, and look forward to obviously continuing to connect professionally, but also the banter behind the scenes is always what keeps me going each and every day. You guys are awesome. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to our educators. And, one of the things I've said to Basil and all three of these guys early on is that I'm committed to you all as my friends and as leaders to continue to give other people a voice, and to continue to move this message forward and be better myself. So I am better because of all 3 of you. So thank you all. Go back and now do some work, would you? You guys have a job to do, right? Go log off and go do your jobs. Come on, now you're off on meetings and stuff. So have a great day, fellas, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
All right, see ya.
Today too,
What'd you say, Dennis?
Make sure you have fun. Don't get so stressed out about things. If you're not having fun, that's only gonna make your work even more difficult.
I hear you.
Meet some great people and have some fun along the way. I have to go teach a class right now, so I'll see you guys.
All right, go do your job, Dennis. See you guys. Is that JD? He made an appearance too.